Hi guys, hope you're well. Hope you've had a fantastic January. I know that I have. I've absolutely hit the ground running, and so I've been super excited to come on here today and share with you guys what's happened over the last 30 days. And especially after last month where we talked about a lot of high-level detail of what's going to go on throughout the year, this is the first time where I really get to speak to what I'm passionate about, which is the data that's driving everything that I'm doing. And so over the course of the last 6 or 7 weeks, I've been recording just about every detail about my life. And this is the first time where we get to dive in together, try and understand that data, try and recognize some patterns, and then most importantly, try and create some action points that are ultimately going to help me run this race at the end of the year. But before we do jump into that data, I did want to give you guys a little bit more context around the race itself, because I'm sure, like it was to me a few months ago, the Blackall 100 is probably a pretty foreign concept to most of you guys. And so for those that don't know, this race is run on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, up in the Mapleton area, which I'm sure a lot of you would be very familiar with. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful area. I've tried to redraw a little bit of a map of the race to show you guys what it looks like. I don't know how good of a job I've done, probably not too good, but hopefully it does give you some sort of a concept. And as I've been watching photos and videos of what this race actually looks like, honestly, guys, it looks stunning. I don't think you could pick a better place to run 100 kilometers because the scenes that you actually get to see through mountains, through valleys, through creeks, through waterfalls, it just looks like a really, really engaging sort of terrain to run throughout the 100 kilometers, which I think is actually really important when you're running that sort of distance, to keep you interested, to keep you engaged, keep you sharp. And so I'm very, very happy with the race and where it's being run. But what I did really want to give you guys a little bit more detail about is my specific goals for the 100Ks. And this sort of came out when I was sitting with a mate earlier in January, and I was sort of taking him through what I was planning to do throughout the year. And one of the first questions that he fired back at me was, what are your goals for the race? Like, where do you want to come? How quickly do you want to run it? And at that point, honestly, when he asked me that question, I realized I haven't thought about that at all. Really hadn't put any thought into it. And I think, to me, running 100 kilometers at that time was this outlandish goal that if I could achieve that, then I would achieve my goal for the year. But when I actually started looking at it, thinking about it, and breaking it down kilometer by kilometer, I realized that that's probably cutting myself a little bit short because I really think I can do better than just finishing the race. So I have put a little bit of thought into it, and I'd like to show you guys what I'd like to achieve in this race. So what I've done here to show you guys is put a bit of a number line up the side of this board here that goes for 24 hours, which is the cutoff time of the race. So you can see I've got goal number 3 is to finish the race in 24 hours. If I can't finish it that quickly, then my race will be over and I won't succeed. But to finish there, it's just a 14-minute, 24-second pace, which honestly, it's slower than an average walking pace. And I'd really like to think that I can get myself to a physical condition where that's not too much of a problem. I think barring injury or maybe some catastrophic event that could happen throughout the race, I really like to think that I can achieve that. So that is my bottom goal. And as we go through this board, you can probably see that I've set out my goals a little bit differently from most people. I do have 3 separate goals. And the reason behind that is I've actually been listening to a book by Cal Horner, who's an ultramarathon runner. Gives a lot of really, really good practical advice about how to actually run an ultramarathon. But he does talk about this one instance where he was racing and he'd set himself this very, very lofty goal to finish the race at a certain time. And he got about halfway through the race, and I can't remember exactly what the circumstance was. It was either injury or equipment not working as he intended. But he realized that he wasn't going to make the time that he'd originally planned for. And he said then that something switched mentally in him, and because he didn't have a backup goal of just finishing the race, he decided there and then to make the unfortunate decision and quit. And he actually says in the book that that decision has haunted him since, and he's carried that regret with him. And the reason and the real lesson that he said to take away from it was to set yourself a backup goal of finishing the race. And especially, I think, when you're talking about distances like 100 kilometers or 100 miles, just finishing the race is such a great accomplishment that I really don't think it should be overlooked. That's why I've got goal 3 there. But then if we look at the very, very top, and it's a little bit close to first place. You can see I've got first place there at 10.5 hours for 2020. I've set my top goal at 13 hours for the entire race, which would average out to 7 minutes and 48 seconds per kilometer. And before you guys say it, I know that that sounds like a ridiculous goal for someone who has not run 100 kilometers before. I think if I did run that time, it would place me around 13th in the 2020 standings out of about 150 competitors, which, yes, I know it sounds ridiculous, but for me, the reason that I've set that goal is I actually have no idea what I'm like in this arena yet. I know I mentioned to you guys last month that I've run 21 kilometers before, which is obviously nowhere near the 100 that I'll need to run for this race. But I've never trained like this. I've never run like this, and I've never put into something like this. So I think until I have the data to tell me that this is a ridiculous goal, I'm not going to sell myself short. I'm really going to go for that strategy of aiming for the moon and hitting the stars rather than aiming for the stars and hitting the trees. Because, like I said, I don't know what I'm capable of yet. And of course, if we get 2, 3, 4, 5 months into training and I do find out that 13 hours is just completely outlandish and a ridiculous goal, then yes, I'll readjust, of course. But until I have that data, that goal is going to remain there. And so I'm going to try and work towards that. But I do have a goal in between them, which I do think is quite realistic, is 18 hours. And that is a 10-minute, 48-second pace. Again, I'd really like to think that I can get myself physically to the point where I can run that. And the reason that I've actually put it at 18 hours is that the Blackall 100 is a qualifying race for the Western States 100 miler, which I know sounds even more ridiculous than what's happening right now. But it's actually one of the most famous ultramarathon races in the entire world, run in the United States. And if I can finish the race in 18 hours, I'll get a ticket in a lottery to actually enter that race. And there's only 369 competitors that can race in that race per year because of legislation around the conservation area that it runs in. So it is limited and demand is much higher than supply to get into the race. So I thought if I can finish the race in 18 hours, get my ticket, and somehow luck out in the lottery to get into it, it's going to be too hard to resist. And honestly, it's a pretty good excuse to get out to the States, which I never have. So I think that would be fantastic in itself. So they're my 3 goals. That's sort of where the race is headed for me this year, I hope. But I think now that we've got that out of the way, it's time for the fun stuff. It's time to dive into the data. All right, guys, it is now time for the fun stuff, which is diving into the data and seeing what sort of insights and what sort of actions we can get out of it, which are ultimately going to help me get closer to those goals that we just discussed. I thought what we'd do today is we'd go through the report that's live on the site and go through the 4 main pages and try and draw an insight and an action out of each of them to see if I can get myself closer to that 100K mark. And so if we start on the nutrition page, what you're going to see is a big vomit of data. But really, the main goal of this page is to try and match each individual day that I go through against the set of goals for the average adult in terms of their carbs, their fats, kilojoules, protein, and sodium, to see how close am I getting to those recommended levels or how far I'm getting. I guess as we look at that data, we can see I'm getting pretty far. There's a whole lot of red, a whole lot of yellow, and really not a whole lot of green, which is a little bit concerning. But for me, I think my levels are probably a little bit different than the average adult because of the amount I'm exercising. And I'm actually going to be working with a physio early in Feb to try and make some goals specific to my training routine. So I'm really, really excited for that. But really, the big insight that I got out of this month in terms of looking at nutrition is the protein column. If you have a look, if you disregard yesterday, which was a very poor eating day, you can see that my percentages for recommended protein are 164, 177, 173, 214, 187. I'm consistently getting too much protein, and your body actually just can't absorb that much at that point. And so the insight that I got out of that was actually a good money saver, because before I looked at this data, I was actually buying protein powder as well, which I guess is really quite expensive as well when you take it most days. And so when I looked at the data, I saw that I was getting way too much protein, and I was actually just wasting my money on something that my body couldn't absorb. So the great action point out of that one was I am no longer buying protein powder. So that was quite fantastic actually to get that out of the data because it's such a practical tip. So that was a good one out of nutrition. If we have a look at sleep, this is probably the one where the most interesting trend came out of. because you can sort of see I've gone for the same sort of pattern where you can see my goals for deep sleep, light sleep, REM sleep, and total sleep. And I'm good in most categories apart from deep sleep, which seems to be consistently under. And when I was looking at the reasons behind it, that's where this graph actually became really, really useful, because you can see it tracks the different types of sleep throughout the weeks. And down here in the light blue, you can see deep sleep. And what you can see is all through December, I'm not getting a whole lot. In January, it starts to have these humps where it goes up and down and up and down. And what I recognized is that those humps where it goes up is actually when I'm going to work. And so that's when I'm getting more consistent sleep, because I'm going to sleep, I want to feel good for work, and then I'm up at the same time every single day. So it lets my body adjust to a rhythm. It lets it get in that circadian rhythm, I think it's pronounced. Not that I know a lot about sleep, but I have looked into it. And if you get your body into a rhythm, it's much better for its deep sleep. And so the problem that I'm facing at the moment is clearly I'm inconsistent on weekends. If I'm hanging out with friends, or if I'm watching a Chelsea game or something like that, I love the EPL, which isn't great for sleep. It tends to really sort of mess up my sleep a little bit. And so my real action point for this month is to try and get a little bit more consistent on those weekends, to see if I can get my deep sleep a little bit more high, a little bit closer to that green, because I know it's important for recovery. I know it's important for brain function. And so I'm very, very much looking forward to trying to fix that up and see how we go next month. And so if we move to the stress page now, this has been another really, really surprising one for me, because I actually use my Garmin watch to track my stress. And what it's come up is, after I've averaged the data across the different weekdays, it actually turns out that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday are my least stressful days, which I would have pegged at completely the opposite. Because obviously going to work, working with clients and projects, you'd think that it'd increase the stress. But somehow hanging out with friends and relaxing for me is more stressful than that. So go figure, that's probably not fantastic. But the interesting thing out of that is, over the last few months, I've been getting these headaches on a Saturday morning, and I've sort of been self-diagnosing for the fact that I work so hard during the week. I fill up my week, so I have barely any spare time. By the time I get to Saturday morning, I thought that my body just knew that it could kind of relax a little bit, and it'd almost be a symptom of all the stress that I'd incurred throughout the week to then rebel and say, I don't feel good. And I thought that's what was happening. But when I look at the data, it could actually be the direct opposite. I could be feeling completely fine through the week in a good routine, and then Friday, my stress spikes up, and so Saturday morning, I don't feel great. And that's something I really want to address, because I'll be doing a lot of my long runs on a Saturday morning, so I really can't afford to be sort of having those headaches, which are going to make me feel a lot more lethargic and probably a lot less energetic. So I guess the action point out of that is to try and get my routine a little bit more consistent, very similar to the sleep. I guess we're trying to sort of shove those average lines together so it's a little bit more consistent. It's going to make my training a little bit easier. So that's what I got out of stress. And then the last one I want to talk to you guys about is my exercise. I mentioned it in the blog, and I encourage you to read it if you haven't already. But if we look at this graph here, the exercise that I've been doing over the last month or so, you can see a couple patterns here. In early December, really all throughout December, the only exercise I was doing was weights. And the reason behind that is I actually had an injury, like I mentioned in my last vlog. I'd been injured for about 3 months, and I'd managed it so poorly. I'd injured it running, and then I went back to running a couple times. I played a soccer game. I just kept making it worse and worse and worse, and didn't get it recovered properly. By the time December had rocked around, I had started seeing a physio who recommended that I go get an ultrasound, but because I was trying to get everything up off the ground for Data Insights, I'd neglected it for far too long. And so I basically went through the whole month feeling bad for myself and feeling like I couldn't run. By the time January had rocked around, which I'd originally planned to start training January 1st, I knew I couldn't. And so I got fed up with it on January 3rd, finally got the ultrasound. And on that day in the ultrasound, I was actually told that there was nothing wrong with the hamstring. They couldn't detect anything, no tear, no abnormal signs. And so that actually did a bit of a mental switch for me, where I went from I'm injured to I need to strengthen my hamstring so it feels good. And so that's where you see this spike of stretching here, and that should include hamstring strength as well, actually, because I just completely switched and started strengthening it from there, which actually made a big difference because 12 days later I went for my first run, where here I was really worried that I wasn't going to be running at all in January. And so that was fantastic. But the real takeaway and the real action point for me out of this is get diagnosed early. Because if I had that ultrasound a couple of weeks earlier, maybe I could have gotten that same diagnosis. Maybe I could have started stretching and strengthening earlier, which would have brought up my training a week or two, which means I would just have an extra week or two in training. And who knows how much of a difference that's going to make at the end of the day. It could be massive. And so I'll be working with a physio all year, actually an old friend of mine who's been really fantastic about getting me back up to running shape. And so if anything does come up, it's going to get diagnosed quickly, and that's the real takeaway from this one. So that's pretty much the 4 action points out of the report as it sits. We will iterate through this report. I've been recording a lot more data that's on the screen at the moment. So you will see a new iteration, hopefully a little bit more clear, a little bit easier to get insights next month. And speaking of next month, let's actually dive into what's happening because there's a whole lot of exciting stuff coming up in February, and I'm super excited to share it with you guys. All right, guys, so the last thing that I wanted to go through today is where we're heading in February. I think January has been a fantastic month in terms of getting data insights out there for you guys to see. And then also from a physical training point of view for me, I think it's been great getting back into running. But I think Feb's going to be even better than January was. So I wanted to take you guys through some of the highlights of where we're going. And if we start at the top 2 relate to my training. And I'm actually going to be partnering with both a running coach and a nutritionist this month. So I think that's going to be fantastic in terms of just helping me to refine my goals, both in terms of what I'm taking in to fuel me and then how I'm using that fuel when I'm training. And so I think that's going to be really good in accelerating me towards getting good results and really trying to accomplish those goals that we discussed before. And then from a systems point of view, this is the one that I'm most excited about. I'm actually going to be applying for the Garmin Connect API in Feb. And if you don't know what that means, basically, like I discussed before, I'm getting a lot of my data at the moment off my Garmin watch, which is fantastic for recording everything. But at the moment, the process of taking that data, exporting it out of Garmin Connect, which is their interface, and then putting it into our systems is a little bit laborious. It's a little bit of a long process. And so what the API will do is allow that process to happen in the background without anyone actually touching anything. And so all that data is just going to sync up automatically. And so that's going to make the user experience for me much nicer. And then eventually when you're using the product as well, if you have a Garmin watch, you'll get the same benefit of all of that syncing automatically. So very excited about that. That's also going to allow for some expanded reporting. The data that I'm currently grabbing is just the basics. And so once I actually get it all syncing across, I'll be able to go a lot more in depth with the exercise that I'm doing. I'm already recording a whole bunch more data that wasn't in that report that we saw today. So I think what we go through next month is going to be a lot more in detail. We're going to get some really cool insights, and so I'm very excited about that. And then the very last one, I don't know how this one's going to go, so I really want your guys' feedback on this, but that's the Data Insights Running Club. And I've put that there because one of the most encouraging things that came out of the vlog last month is I actually had a friend who I hadn't spoken to in years message me and say, hey, really interested in what you're doing. I'm running similar distances as well, thinking I'll probably do the marathon next year, maybe even the ultra. Would you like to run together? And I just thought that was fantastic because now I have a running partner. And so we're going to start running this month, which is great, doing a little bit of trail running. And it just made me think that maybe we could actually get a bit of a running club together, even if we go out once a month. If there's people interested in getting a bit of a community together, be nice, get it together, maybe go for a coffee afterwards, meet some new people. I'm not sure how that all looks, but if anyone is interested, maybe even if you're interested in running one-on-one, more than open to hear because I'm always looking for extra people to run with. And so if you did want to get in contact, I monitor all the socials. You can get to me through Facebook, Instagram, the Data Insights website. However you get in contact, I will see it. So if you're looking for someone to run with, feel free to reach out. That's where we're heading in Feb. I'm very excited about it, guys. I really appreciate your support. I really appreciate you watching this. I hope you're as excited as me for what's to come in Feb and the entire year. I'll check back in with you guys next month. Thank you.